Picture a reality where the Confederacy didn't merely struggle to survive, but actually emerged victorious. There would be no grand celebrations in Washington, no vast territorial takeovers, just a fractured America, tense and uneasy in a fragile truce. What if the true triumph wasn't achieved on battlefields, but rather within political chambers, through exhausted northern spirits, and a nation unraveling from inside? This version of history rarely makes it into your textbooks. It's the harsh reality that formal education tends to overlook, a story where liberty, slavery, and influence clash in a precarious standoff that altered the fate of a continent. Stick with me, because what unfolded afterward changed everything, revealing a far darker and more intricate tale than you might have expected. Before diving in, please like and subscribe to support our growing community. A Confederate win would not have come from overwhelming military might or a sweeping attack designed to seize Northern territory. Instead, it would have arisen from shifts in politics and Northern weariness. By 1864, the Union Army was stretched dangerously thin, burdened by heavy losses and diminishing public support for an enduring war. President Abraham Lincoln's campaign for a second term faced stiff opposition from a Northern population drained by continuous conflict. His rival, George McClellan, a former Union general Lincoln had dismissed, promised to bring peace no matter the cost, a message that resonated with many tired of the high toll. Had McClellan secured the presidency, he might have pursued a ceasefire, possibly even recognizing Confederate sovereignty to end the bloodshed. Yet this would not have delivered the grand conquest Southern leaders dreamed of. There wouldn't be Confederate flags flying over Washington, D.C., or extensive Southern domination of Union territory. Rather, independence likely would have come through negotiation, not battlefield victory. Southern military efforts, although sometimes bold and surprising, remained largely defensive and lacked the capacity for sustained invasions into northern states. Their survival depended more on exploiting political rifts and discontent in the North than achieving total military control. Official recognition of Confederate independence would have plunged both nations into immediate logistical and political crises. The new borders separating Union and Confederacy would have posed significant hardships for ordinary people. Families torn apart by these lines would find themselves citizens of two different countries. A grandmother living in Virginia might need diplomatic permission or passports to visit relatives in Maryland, turning once simple travel into a bureaucratic maze. Territorial conflicts would complicate matters further. Border states like Kentucky and Missouri, claimed by both sides, could become hotspots for renewed violence, as neither faction would easily concede. These contested areas might see continuous skirmishes or proxy wars as each struggled to control vital land and resources. On the international stage, the Confederacy's position would have been shaky from the start. Although Southern leaders hoped for support from European powers such as Britain and France during the war, these efforts largely failed due to the Confederacy's reliance on slavery, a practice abolished in British colonies by 1834 and broadly condemned across Europe. Even Spain, which maintained colonies in the Americas, was unlikely to risk its own stability by supporting a pro-slavery regime so close to its borders. Meanwhile, Mexico, angered over losing Texas, might have taken advantage of the situation to destabilize its northern neighbor or reclaim territory. The Union could have sought an alliance with Mexico as part of a wider strategy to weaken the Confederacy politically and militarily, creating a complex network of competing interests throughout North America. The Confederacy's economy was precariously based, heavily relying on enslaved labor and agriculture, especially cotton production. Although this system had supported Southern prosperity prior to the war, it proved insufficient to sustain an independent nation amid a rapidly industrializing world. The global abolitionist movement was gaining momentum, and nations like Britain were growing increasingly reluctant to trade with economies dependent on slavery. Even if Britain or France had desired southern cotton during the conflict, alternative suppliers such as Egypt and India reduced their reliance on the American South. Within its own borders, the Confederacy faced grave economic challenges even before achieving independence. By 1865, hyperinflation had rendered Confederate currency nearly worthless, leaving the fledgling nation financially precarious. Plantation owners may have steadfastly held on to slavery not just as a financial necessity, but also as a deep-rooted cultural symbol of Southern identity. Yet, technological advancements such as mechanical cotton harvesters and other agricultural machinery would eventually diminish the economic viability of enslaved labor. Without robust trade relationships or international allies willing to turn a blind eye to its dependence on slavery, the Confederacy's economy would probably have collapsed within several years of independence. This economic fragility might have deepened rifts between wealthy plantation elites and impoverished white farmers struggling to adjust in an era increasingly dominated by industry rather than agriculture. The Confederacy's political future was uncertain, particularly after Jefferson Davis's presidency. Davis was regarded as pragmatic but inflexible, a war leader whose stubbornness often estranged potential supporters within his administration. Robert E. Lee could have seemed a natural heir due to his military successes and iconic status in the South. Nevertheless, Lee was famously apolitical and reportedly uninterested in political leadership beyond his military role, leaving room for other figures to rise. Moderates such as Alexander Stephens or Judah P. Benjamin might have steered the Confederacy toward diplomacy and compromise with surrounding powers. Benjamin, in fact, proposed drastic initiatives, including offering freedom to enslaved individuals who fought for the Confederacy, a contentious but pragmatic attempt to survive in an unfriendly global environment. On the other hand, hardliners like John C. Breckinridge represented a more uncompromising stance determined to preserve slavery at any cost and expand Confederate influence westward. Breckinridge's fervent defense of Southern traditions would have appealed to those wishing to maintain Davis's policies, but risked further isolating the Confederacy both at home and abroad. Even after a peace agreement acknowledged Confederate independence, relations between the Union and Confederacy would remain fraught and unstable, perpetually on the edge of renewed hostilities. The two nations, now neighbors with a tangled and contentious history, would be caught in a delicate rivalry prone to escalating into a Cold War-like confrontation. One of the most immediate and volatile issues would revolve around fugitive slaves. Before and during the Civil War, disputes over escaped slaves were among the most intense conflicts between North and South. In this alternate reality, with an official border separating the countries, such tensions would likely deepen. Slaves fleeing into Union territory would provoke diplomatic crises as the Confederacy demanded their return. Conversely, Confederate forces crossing into Union lands to retrieve escapees by force could ignite serious border incidents or even armed conflicts. These provocations would worsen relations, fueling an environment of distrust and hostility. Both nations would also vie for influence over the Western territories as they expanded toward the Pacific Ocean. The Union's industrial economy and growing population would drive its westward expansion, while the Confederacy's agrarian system, dependent on slavery, would seek to acquire new lands to sustain its economic framework. This rivalry might spark territorial disputes over resource-rich or strategically important areas, vital for trade routes, presenting further potential flashpoints. Skirmishes in these contested regions could resemble the pre-Civil War clashes in Bleeding Kansas, but on a wider and far more dangerous scale. Meanwhile, international alliances would add another layer of complexity to this tense and fragile peace. The Union might strengthen its ties with Britain, Canada, or even Mexico as part of a broader strategy to diplomatically isolate the Confederacy. Mexico, still bitter over losing Texas and wary of Confederate ambitions along its northern border, could side with the Union in hopes of regaining lost territory or curbing Confederate expansion. Meanwhile, the Confederacy might turn its attention southward toward Latin America or the Caribbean, seeking opportunities to broaden its influence. Southern leaders could attempt to destabilize nearby regions or forge alliances with colonial powers such as Spain to secure trade routes or extend slavery into new territories. This rivalry between two Americas would likely go beyond territorial claims and diplomacy, evolving into an ideological battle. The Union, having abolished slavery and positioning itself as a defender of liberty and progress, would promote its values internationally. In contrast, the Confederacy's firm support for slavery and resistance to industrialization would increasingly isolate it as global abolitionist efforts gained momentum. This ideological divide might manifest through proxy conflicts abroad or competing efforts to sway emerging nations in Latin America or Africa, pulling them into opposing spheres of influence. Slavery was more than just an economic foundation for the Confederacy. It was intricately embedded in its social structure and national identity. While much of the world moved away from slavery during this period, Southern leaders remained resolute in upholding it, despite mounting global condemnation. Yet industrialization posed an existential threat to slavery's long-term survival. As agricultural technology advanced, replacing manual labor and animal power with tractors and machinery, the need for vast enslaved labor populations diminished. Even if slavery were abolished due to economic or diplomatic pressures, genuine racial equality would likely remain unattainable within Confederate borders. Southern authorities might impose apartheid-like systems designed to maintain white supremacy over newly freed black populations, which made up significant portions of several states. A divided America, one free and one slaveholding, would have enormous consequences not only at home, but across the world. Without unity, neither nation would wield the combined influence they once held. The United States might struggle to emerge as a global superpower without Southern resources and manpower during critical events such as World Wars I and II. Meanwhile, the Confederacy's reliance on outdated institutions like slavery would render it increasingly marginalized internationally, with a stagnant economy and a society torn by internal conflicts. Ultimately, this alternate history presents two weakened nations facing sharply different crises, one plagued by regional instability, the other clinging desperately to an unsustainable way of life while resisting change at all turns. In this divided scenario, the America we know today simply would not exist, and the entire course of history would be fundamentally changed. So what if the Confederacy had prevailed? Not through fiery battles or sweeping conquests, but by political exhaustion, fractured loyalties, and a nation split in two? Would America have been stronger or eternally broken? Would the world accept two Americas, one clinging to slavery, the other striving for progress? The truth is, this alternate history reflects more than just what might have been. It is a mirror revealing the delicate bonds that hold our present society together. Now, I want to hear your views. If the Confederacy had endured as an independent nation, how do you think it would have shaped the modern world? Could peace have lasted, or was conflict unavoidable? Share your thoughts below. Let's explore this overlooked chapter of history together. And if you found this enlightening, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share, because some truths deserve to be uncovered.